All right. So, what I was thinking we would do here is talk about sort of the three most, in our view, consequential decisions that Neon made in buying and releasing Three Identical Strangers. And so I'll start, and as I see it, those are, our decision to buy the film. Relative to other films at Sundance and what we were thinking when we bought it. The second is the marketing of the film and decisions we made there about what to reveal and what not to reveal and sort of how to position the movie. And then the third, and I think most consequential decision, is the decision of when to release it in a summer with some other very successful documentaries. Does that sound right? All right. So I'll begin just tell you about my experience working at Sundance 2018, going into that festival with Three Identical Strangers. I think that, looking back on that, I'm just trying to see you through this light here. I think that we had, going into that festival, we're looking at RBG as the film that was the film that we were sort of targeting at the top of our list for nonfiction. And, the reasons for that are obvious. The cult of personality around Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the cross-generational sort of appeal that she has, and then also just the fact that it would be an election year when we'd be releasing it, and the sort of activist energy, gave us confidence that there would be, at minimum, sort of modest, theatrical business to be done with that movie. And we thought, this would be a movie that would be an important film and one we'd be proud to work on. And none of us, of course, predicted or could have predicted the success that film was going to have. And really no one did, but that's what we were thinking going to the festival. Three Identical Strangers, I had heard about that film from the same producer of RBG, CNN Films, about a year before it premiered at Sundance, and while it was in production. And what I recall from that conversation was that she emphasized, Courtney Sexton at CNN, she emphasized that this was a film about nature versus nurture. And, I think in the abstract, I just didn't think that sounded particularly interesting. And the story that she was trying to describe to me in that room, I think I found sort of hard to follow and probably embellished, maybe too good to be true. And so I sort of tuned it out and focused on RBG. A couple of weeks before the festival, I started hearing from people that we know and respect who had seen Three Identical Strangers, and they were all independently telling us, myself and Jeff Deutschman, our head of acquisitions, and Tom Quinn, the head of Neon, that Three Identical Strangers was the film that Neon was going to want, the documentary that Neon was going to want to acquire at Sundance. And that made me curious why they were saying that, and started reading more about who made the film. And I didn't know the director, Tim Wardle, but I did know the production company, Raw. Raw is a production company in the UK that does a lot of great stuff, but they had made a film called The Imposter, which was one of my favorite documentaries that was at Sundance in, I think, 2012 or 13. And I remember the experience of seeing The Imposter for the first time, and that got me really curious about what they were going to do with this story. So we sort of, I made it a priority to be at the first screening of Three Identical Strangers at Sundance. And what I recall from that first screening was David Courier, who was the programmer at Sundance, introducing the film and saying that this was the documentary for people who don't like documentaries. And that struck me, and I actually wrote it down, and because very few films can deliver on a promise like that, documentaries, and when the credits rolled at the end, I realized that, first thing I did was sprinted to the bathroom because I hadn't moved for 90 minutes. I wouldn't dare sort of get up because so much of this story revealed itself in every minute of the film, and I didn't want to miss any of it. I realized I hadn't checked my phone. I hadn't really budged, and that it held my attention, and I had so many questions when it was done. And that he was right, and that this was the kind of documentary I could imagine friends of mine who are not documentary watchers, my parents, really connecting with. And not just the story, but the characters. They were all very familiar to me. And then the other thing I remember is that Bobby and David, who are the two characters in the film that sort of tell the story, two of the brothers, were there at the Q&A, and they got up afterwards and they talked about how their relationship had been strained for a long time, and that this film was bringing them closer together. And that struck me also. So, I left there and went back and told Tom and the rest of the team that, you should see this right away. And they did. They saw it the next day. And, what Tom Quinn, who's the head of Neon, is very good at is not only seeing what makes the film great, and in this case, what he saw immediately was the complex sort of feat of filmmaking that it was, and that it was wrestling with these really profound ideas that everyone could relate to, but that he could see the entertainment sort of box office potential, and he could imagine what we could do with the film in its release to make this a sort of must-see Broadway show style event. And he was talking about that, within an hour of having seen it. And the rest is history in terms of we went aggressively after that film, and we all loved it so much. We all couldn't stop talking about it. And I think what we knew is that there were going to be a bunch of films that were going to be vying for box office over the summer or in the fall, and for Academy Awards consideration, and that this was going to be, the horse that we wanted to back, and that there were risks of buying this film relative to an RBG or some of the other films, but that this was the one that we wanted to sort of bet our time on and our money on. So that was the decision to buy the movie. Right from there, and we can both talk about this, I think, was the decision of how to position the movie and how important it was. And I remember being concerned when I was watching it, and I actually put this in my coverage of it, that my one big concern was if the secrets of the film get out before its release, did we need to release it right away in order to keep people from finding out sort of what the secrets of the film were? And if they did, were they going to want to see it? Fortunately, I think Tom Quinn thought a lot bigger than that. And he said, for the kind of audience that we're going after, the secrets, they're going to want to help us keep the secrets. That's part of the enjoyment of this film, is that people are going to want to see it, know the secrets of what happened, and not share them with their friends while simultaneously telling them, you have to see this movie and you have to see it for yourself. And he could see that. In terms of the poster for the film, which I guess is right behind me here, I will tell you that the poster originally for Three Identical Strangers was not this. It was a very similar title treatment, but it was sort of stacked and went horizontally across the page, and most importantly, none of this hair was here. But it was the same tagline, and this was our original poster did not have these faces. It was the tagline, it was the title treatment. The way that the title treatment was laid out on the page definitely evoked like a Broadway show, and the risks, I suppose, of doing that just relying on those 3 words, 3 identical strangers, not putting any faces or story on the page, on the in terms of the imagery, and then having as big a tagline as that tagline, which, you know, I think initially the filmmaker just thought, you know, being British and modest and loath to, you know, call out our own, you know, success and greatness. He said, I don't understand this. This is counterintuitive to me. And the decision that Tom and the marketing team, Christian Parks and Mike Winton, were making here was, you know, if we're selling a Broadway show and we're trying to reach an audience that doesn't ordinarily see documentaries, and we want them to see this as a, you know, must-see, can't-miss event, then we have to think more along the lines of how they sell big Broadway shows, you know. And the language that the most amazing, incredible, remarkable, true story ever told was consistent with the kinds of language that some of the characters in the film are using, and that in a way we were just sort of mimicking the voice of the film, and the embellishment, if there was any, just came from enthusiasm, like the way that the guy from Newsday says, like, if you ask me the most remarkable story ever, that's what the voice of that tagline is. You have any thoughts about the poster, you want?
Well, I'm letting Dan do a lot of the talking here because I was out on maternity leave for Sundance and for kind of everything leading up to the release of the film. So I got back in May. You know, I had seen the film. They kept talking about it. I saw all the coverage, you know, as I was sitting on my couch for 3 months, you know, talking about how amazing this movie is, and you have to see it, and you can't believe the secrets of it, and, you know, everything that's sort of in the campaign for it. And we had a release date at the middle or end of May. We decided that it was a better idea to go out ahead of Won't You Be My Neighbor and RBG. We thought that we needed to get ahead of those movies because those movies were going to be huge summer juggernauts in the documentary space, which obviously they were. You know, so I walked in. The poster when I came back was this poster basically, but without the heads, and we were like going in May. We had this poster without the heads. We were like, nobody's gonna understand. Everyone's gonna know it's a big thing, but nobody's gonna really understand what this movie is. And for a theatrical audience, putting this poster in there with sort of no context is just, we felt like maybe at the end of the day it was just gonna confuse people. So we decided to add the heads last minute. We were kind of like, what could we do? We made like a million other iterations of the poster. And then it was just simple. We just added these heads, and we were like done. So it worked really well because it nailed everything that we wanted, and then just was like, oh, these are the 3 identical strangers, these 3 guys. And then the other thing that we sort of realized that the best thing we really had going for this movie was the movie itself. So we just screened it everywhere we could. We put it in a million regional festivals after Sundance. We screened it for any film club, any film group that would have it. These guys are, they're all from the New York tri-state area, and they were all Jewish. So we screened it for a lot of Jewish film festivals, for a lot of synagogues, NEJCC, and we just knew that the buzz from these audiences and this talk from these audiences would just, it would do the work for us, basically. So we ended up pushing our date back into late June, the very end of June for it. And this was kind of it was maybe a risky decision. We could have gotten lost in all of the other summer Sundance movies in these documentaries. Like, how many documentaries do people really want to see in a summer? These are questions we ask ourselves. I guess we sort of didn't appreciate that audiences would see 3 or more. You know, the Whitney doc was a week later. That worried us. But we went for it, and we were like, let's just keep screening the movie. Let's just keep getting the word of mouth out there. And bingo, let's put our trailer on these two juggernaut documentaries that everyone's going to see. This is the audience we know we want. Maybe they won't see a third documentary, but if anyone's going to see a documentary, it's going to be them. So, as people were coming through all of these theaters all summer long, and these are two documentaries, Won't You Be My Neighbor and RBG, that, documentaries don't usually play in 200 or more theaters. It's usually a much smaller footprint that you see. And these movies were, Won't You Be My Neighbor got up to I think 1,000 screens or something, and RBG was up to 400, 450. So it was a lot of eyeballs that we were getting. It was just a lot of, free promotion and publicity for our film. And I think that decision ultimately was something that really, really helped the movie in the long run. We ended up going later in June. We ended up being able to play all summer long. And a lot of the decision to put your movie, put your art film or your Sundance film or, something that we call sort of counter-programming to a lot of the bigger tentpole movies in May or June, is that then you have the whole summer for these audiences to watch your movie. And we really were able to capitalize that in a very big way. You always think that you have something exciting and something big and that people want to see, but none of us really know until that opening weekend if people are going to come out and actually see it. So just like anybody else, we just wait on pins and needles until these grosses come in and we see what we actually have. You say to yourself, the history of documentaries, what has really been successful. If you have $1 million grossing documentary, that's really pretty good. So you can only sort of use these historical counterpoints to really judge what maybe you have. Maybe it's $1 million documentary. Oh, we would be so grateful if it's a $3 million documentary, So we put it out there. It does an amazing opening weekend. And immediately, we know we have a hit. It did amazing with New York audiences. This movie absolutely resonated with them. Typically, the first art house crowd who comes to see a specialized film is an older audience. It is a lot of times a Jewish audience. These were the these were the tastemakers that we needed to get this thing kicked off. And they came out right away and they told all their friends. And just slowly through the summer, we just started bobbing and weaving through all of these other specialized titles, all of these bigger releases, and looked for any gap in the marketplace where we could add more theaters and just sort of keep this thing going, which is what we did. And I think at the end of July, maybe it was the movie had been out for already 5 weeks basically, and we didn't add the most runs that we could add until the end of July, when it was in, I think 400 theaters. And then from that point on, it just stuck around. Everybody wanted to see this film. And it was really interesting because one thing that we ended up doing was when it came out of theaters, pretty quickly after it came out of theaters, it was on Delta. It was so people could watch it on planes. And this was something that we kind of did. We were it's another great word of mouth tool. Everybody's on their flight, and it's amazing how many people came up to me and said, yeah, we watched your movie on the plane. And then, and then it just became they told their friend they watched it on a plane, and it was still in theaters because people couldn't, it was still grossing. It was still making money. Nobody cared that it was on a plane. It was just as long as it's making money, let's play it. And it just kept the ball rolling from there. And, we do a fair amount of sort of testing and exit polling. And so exit polling is when you come to the theater after you see the movie, they kind of accost you afterwards, not too aggressively, and ask you certain questions about, what was the marketing that got you into the film? Where did you see a review for the film? Did you watch a trailer somewhere? And overwhelmingly, the response was that people saw the trailer for this movie on RBG or Won't You Be My Neighbor. So it was just this sort of perfect storm of these 3 documentaries that came out this summer that people were really, they were some of the most entertaining, options for people going to theaters, and outside of the narrative features that were out, which are usually the ones that sort of win out. And it was just like an amazing testament to the fact that you can have a really, really exciting documentary that plays more like a narrative than it does like a regular doc. It doesn't need to have, it doesn't need to have big stars. It doesn't need to have all of the things that you would typically think that it would need to have in order to make it successful. And this movie was just like, it was a jaw dropper. It was like, what is this? I have to see this, and I have to tell my friend. And you're so right that basically people wanted to, they wanted to protect that secret in order to make the movie a success. Like, people felt like, oh, this is a discovery of mine, and I want to tell it to you, and I don't want to give away anything. You've got to see it for yourself.
Yeah, I think that decision to screen it a lot, I remember that conversation about, are we at risk here if we screen it too much, if people are going to get online and just start talking about the study. For those of you who have not seen the film, I'm sorry, that's a spoiler, but there's a study, there's an experiment, and if people started writing about the study and digging deep on the study and trying to sort of do their own detective work on how that we would be giving away something that was already out there. It was in reviews. It's not like it was a secret that we were really trying to keep, but we were worried that if we screened it too much, that might get out there. But I think that what Tom and Elissa and Christina Ziza, who's a head of publicity at Neon, rightly decided was that that we're overthinking this, and the benefits to having people see the film and feel like they were the first to see this thing that they would then get to tell, all of their friends and family that they needed to go see and become sort of like the evangelist for this movie, much outweighed the risks of people getting online and talking about it. And then that was the case. I'll just say finally on the trailer, which wound up being our biggest asset, the trailer play in theaters is, I think, what drove the box office success of the film in a summer, as Elissa said, with these other big films. Everybody came to the theater, saw RBG, and said, and saw the trailer for Won't You Be My Neighbor, and said, okay, I'm definitely going to see that. Then they came to the theater and they saw Won't You Be My Neighbor, and they saw the trailer for Three Identical Strangers. They said, holy shit, I want to see that too. This is a summer where I want to see documentaries, and there are 3 great ones. And we were, right to move the release as we did and ride that wave. I still think we would have been a success just based on the word of mouth, but we definitely were able to ride a wave of interest in going to the theater. And also the trailer got shared a ton on Facebook. I think that's where that's where people were seeing the trailer the most. And I think a lot of our audience turned out to be skew older, at least initially, and that they were all sharing. It turns out that older people are on Facebook, and I'm among them. And that's where most people were learning about the film, is that they were either seeing it in the theater or they were sharing and said, we have to see this, we have to see this. And we saw a lot of that.
I also think that people saw this multiple times.
Yeah.
Like, just anecdotally, my dad, who's like the perfect audience for this movie, he was telling me how he had a friend who saw it and then 2 hours later saw it again. So, I mean, she obviously was like floored by it and just needed to sort of dig in deeper by seeing it again. Yeah. So,
and then, in the trailer, just watching it again, I realized that and I went back into my sort of emails to look at the sort of deliberations around the trailer, most of which were happening within, the marketing team. But we're copied on all this stuff and weighing in. And what I saw them sort of debating is how much and to what extent to reveal what this thing is that we're all referring to, but not using the word study. We're not using the word experiment. As far as I think, we did not use the word experiment at any point in the trailer. But both Bobby and Lawrence Wright make reference to this thing that they did. Who are they? And what is this thing, and why don't they want it to come out? The story is remarkable enough without the answer to that secret, but once you're interested in hearing the story and you also know I'm going to get to find out what this thing is and what happened and why, that was important.
Yeah, we sort of played up a little bit of a true crime element
Yeah.
to it. And I think we were sort of thinking that that would maybe be something for younger audiences, that would get younger audiences into the theater. Also, we play at a lot of Alamo Draft Houses across the country. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that theater chain, but the idea is that you go and you drink and you eat there, and it does tend to be for a younger audience for more sort of genre skewing or action-y type films. And they did this really, really cool, and this is something that I saw all the time as a kid, and they don't do them so much anymore, but like reactions after you walk out of a movie, like they would film your reactions and like cut together like this like 2-minute clip, and they do it for Broadway shows all the time too. So we made one of those from the audiences coming out of Alamo Draft House, and it was just like, you're sort of like used to seeing that like typical like older audience, and it was just like this like wide range of like young people in their like Star Wars t-shirts, talking about like how like amazing this movie is. And that turned out to be like a really, really powerful marketing source for us. Like that got shared all over the place on Facebook.
Yeah, that's infectious. Like watching people's reactions to, I love seeing the film with audiences, who are seeing it for the first time. Particularly for those of you who've seen it, the first 20 or 30 minutes is like a roller coaster, and it's just so delightful and fun, and then it takes this very hard turn. But yeah, watching people's reaction to what they just went through after seeing the movie is great, because some people are just stammering; they just can't believe, like and that's the reaction that we were hoping to get, and. What else do we have on this? Well, the other thing that I think that, the other sort of another big decision was at what point to bring out Bobby and David, who early on were saying, we want to do whatever it is that you want us to do, and we're here. And, the risk, of course, there was they get overexposed and people say, okay, I've seen these guys now. I get it, and that we do that too early, and then by the time the film sort of really needed them to make an appearance and sort of drive, renewed interest in the movie, after its initial release, it would be too late, or we would have done it too soon. Or they did, I think, I'm not sure I can remember when they did the Megyn Kelly, the Today Show appearance, but more people in my life, anecdotally, have told me that they learned about the movie when Bobby and David appeared. The week of release, and it was like, I've never had a film other than really I, Tonya, which is the film that we released earlier in the year. Even that, I've never had a film where more people sort of knew of it because it had broken through, and they were reading about it, and it wasn't just the Times or it was like it was on the Today Show, and it was on Megyn Kelly's show, and they say, I know this. So this is like this. That's a documentary. I mean, a lot of them couldn't even believe that it was a documentary because they were interested in it, and they were like, "That's a documentary? Oh, wow! I guess I'm going to see a documentary because I'm interested in that." Bringing them out when we did, I think, was important.
Yeah, and I think we did opening weekend Q&As with them and the filmmaker in New York, and then we ended up bringing them out to LA. And I think that for audiences was just so exciting to see these guys like in person talking about all this stuff. Because in the movie, I mean, and even in this trailer, you sort of see them together, and part of their charm is that they're really so similar in like their mannerisms and how they talk. And I think that seeing that like in real life was really, really exciting for everybody. So I think that just like also just like drove the word of mouth. People were like, oh my gosh, I saw this incredible movie, and then I saw these guys talk about this incredible movie, and it was a really valuable tool. They were really, really happy with everything.
So we're just over the, I think, 35-minute mark here, and I think we could turn it over to questions if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we weren't just standing there for the film. So I saw the film at Sundance, and I absolutely loved it. It was my favorite documentary, and it's incredible. But I just wanted to say, do you feel like, because I feel like something is happening in the documentary world, meaning that until now, documentaries were like the special needs children that we have, that you don't expect too much from them. And
Wow, that's right.
and then all of a sudden they surprise you, and no, and I want to know
Yeah, no, I'm with
your
you.
perspective. You know your perspective, because
Sure.
I always feel like, well, why not? You know, like I want to see documentaries, and I'm sure that other people want to see documentaries. And 7 years ago when I started my documentary, I was like, if I make $500,000 with this documentary, I'd be so happy. And then all of a sudden this summer it was like, you know, $14 million and $23 million, and you're like, oh my God, like, is that a possibility? So I'm, as a new filmmaker, completely like confused as to what is happening. You, on your side, do you feel that too? Like, is it like a, you know, muddy ground where are we going? What can we do? Where's the, you know, like, what's your perception and feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I can speak to it from the acquisitions standpoint, because that's what I do for Neon is look at. I'm part of the acquisitions team, and I focus on documentary. And my background is as a producer of documentary and then sort of narrative feature stuff. And then I think Elissa could speak really to what happened this summer theatrically with these movies. I would say that it's not as, I haven't, and I don't know anyone who has arrived at some sort of conclusion about what the success of these films in theaters this summer means for the interest in documentary writ large in the country. I think that, though, the interest in documentary, according to all these measurements, is greater than it's ever been. Just based on, you could just look at what's on Netflix and on Hulu and on Amazon and HBO, and people want to watch these films. Everyone's trying to get into the nonfiction sort of business. It's just, it's all streaming, you know. They want to watch these films at home. What audiences seem to have been telling us for all these years about their interest in documentaries is, I can be made to watch a documentary and become interested in it if I can watch it at home. But the decision to go out and buy a ticket or two and, you know, get a babysitter, all the costs associated with going to the theater and seeing a film, is not one that I'm willing to make. I'm inclined to make to see a documentary, because they think of them as small and something that I can watch on my, you know, my tablet or my television, and they don't expect there to be anything going on in the theater that is unique, that they couldn't experience with headphones in their bed. I do think that the reason that people want to watch them at home is because a lot of them tend to be sort of slower affairs. You know, a lot of observational documentary requires a lot of patience, and you know, you have to see a lot of them in order to develop the kind of palette where you say, like, okay, I know what I'm getting into here. But for people who aren't used to watching a lot of them, you sit down and watch one of them, a verite documentary or a political doc or an issue doc, and they just go, like, I'm used to watching stuff with a narrative and with characters, something I can follow, and this is requiring more of me than I really want to put in on, like, a Friday or Saturday night when I'm trying to be entertained. And yet, you know, the demand for nonfiction on all of these, in terms of cable and streaming, is greater than it's been. Nonfiction feature films and then series, particularly the series. You know, we all watched, those of us who watch documentaries all watched, and beyond, watched The Jinx, and we watched Making a Murderer, and we watched Wild Wild West, and these things are very popular, and they're becoming sort of important sectors of the sort of entertainment diet, and it's important for all of these streamers and broadcasters to be able to say, we have one sort of premium doc series coming out next year that's going to blow everyone's mind, and everyone wants to be in that business. And it's also important for whether it's Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or HBO to remain competitive in the Academy Awards business for nonfiction. I have my own, thoughts about what happened this summer. I think it's a combination of the films themselves, perfect storm of, two films in particular that were about people, subjects in Mr. Rogers and RBG who have a ton of admiration around them. I think it has a lot to do with the politics of the moment and the amount of sort of angst that you experience every time you go on social media and read the news, and people wanted to escape all of that and feel this cathartic experience that you knew you would have if you went to see a movie about Fred Rogers, and a empowering, galvanizing feeling that you would get from seeing a film about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that just doesn't happen every year where there are films about. And then, and Three Identical Strangers just happens to be, the most amazing, incredible, remarkable true story ever told. And that won't come again next year, It just won't, and it's the films and it's the moment, but I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that it'll happen again next year. But you tell me.
I think maybe in a way, I think that people have, more audiences have gotten normalized to documentary being something that they enjoy watching because of this streaming phenomenon. So I think that plays a small part in it. I think that certainly all the things that Dan said, true. It was a perfect storm of perfect subjects in a year where people are used to the news, but they don't want to go to the news cycle. They're used to seeing real things, but they just want to be taken away on nice trips, basically. So I think those couple things play into it. But I think that overall documentary, we saw a lot of documentaries this summer that didn't work also, and there always will be those. And I think that the way that documentary really is successful is by having characters and a narrative thread and something either timeless or timely about them. And also, people love music. Concert docs always seem to do well. Docs where you just see something so extraordinary in front of your face, like Free Solo, that always seems to do really well. So then when you get into something that's more sort of, niche, very character story driven, that's just something that's like so interesting you can't believe it, like Three Identical Strangers, like that works well too. If you just have a great story and it happens to be a doc, like that will also transcend. So I do think that there is a little bit more, and hopefully this summer has convinced audiences that documentaries can also be worth their while in theaters, and that they're good and they're just as entertaining, if not more entertaining than a lot of narrative features. It's really interesting because we went head to head against the narrative Leave No Trace, which came out this summer. And, in dealing with exhibition, all the theater owners, they're the most pessimistic bunch ever about film. And they're just like, it's another doc. Like, why? You can go online and Google this stuff about these guys. Like, Leave No Trace is coming out, and I was just like, all right. So why don't you play both of them and see what happens? And just like week after week, like you just saw that Leave No Trace was like this movie that I think people really liked. I have a lot of respect for it. But it was not you didn't walk into that movie or walk out of that movie with the same feeling. And so my hope is that this sort of combination of people getting more used to documentary being on television, being available, and being good with this summer of documentary will drive it more so. And Tom Quinn, the head of Neon, he's always loved documentary. Like, we'll never get out of this business, whether the movie makes $10 or the movie makes $15 million. Like, we'll always put them out because we see value in them. And we see value in them for a whole host of reasons. And I think a company like Magnolia will always feel that way, and, you know, but so they're not going anywhere.
And I would just say, just to, you know, not to be negative, to suggest that it's not going to happen next year the way that it did this year is not to suggest that it couldn't happen the year after that. But just that it's not a trend that has now started and will build on its, like, I do think it will have a lot to do with the films and what's happening in the country. And, but I think what this year proved is that it can happen. But whereas the year prior, if you look and you read all the articles about the theatrical documentary, it was pronounced dead. Once again, the theatrical doc is dead. I mean, there's like all these, and even internally, we were sort of like, this is really hard to make anyone want to go see these films in theaters. Maybe we'll just keep doing this, but it's going to have to be very careful about the choices we make and the money we spend, because people just don't want to go see these films in theaters. And a month later, we saw Three Identical Strangers and set our sights on a big box office hit because of the film. It wasn't because, like, we saw the trend reversing itself. The film made us confident, and I think it'll have to do a lot with the films and not, you know.
Well, also with the political situation that's happening, you know, with America being a capitalistic country and we're bringing like socialist values now, maybe it's time to consider that bringing socialism in movie making, meaning that the feelings that we get, what you said, after leaving the theater, could be as important as the money that we bring in from the theater.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michael Larue. I'm in the process of finishing next year's most amazing, incredible, remarkable, true story ever told. And I have it's about my best friend who was one of the Golden Girls, Rue McClanahan.
Wow.
And I have a two-part practical question.
Yeah.
When you go make an acquisition at a film festival, is that it for the filmmaker? You write a check and they're out of the picture now? It's your film? Or is there back end involved as well?
Is that the first question?
That's the first part of the question.
All right, so tell me the second part of the question.
Specifics. How much did you pay for Three Identical Strangers, and what is it grossed? Sorry to be crass,
That's
but
all
I
right.
need to learn here.
We can tell you how much it's gross because that's public information. It's grossed $12.6 million. I can't tell you what we paid for it. No, it's definitely not over for the filmmaker. The way these deals are structured is you pay in advance against revenue from all sources, theatrical, box office revenue, and all the digital streaming revenue and transactional VOD revenue and non-theatrical revenue, and that revenue gets applied against the advance itself, and then the costs of releasing the movie, and then there's a split toward the filmmaker, and between us and the filmmaker, if the film performs well above and beyond our expenses and the advance, then they make money. That's how all the deals are structured. Does that answer the question?
Well, except the part about what you paid for.
Yeah, we can't answer that. I mean, some of that is, if you can read, some of it was reported, but it's not something we usually disclose.
Yeah, you should, if you can kind of just go on to, if you know the documentary you want to think about and the company that acquired it, you can usually just Google that and they'll show you on Deadline, like, you know, Magnolia acquires this for, Neon acquires this for.
Congratulations on acquiring and distributing this film. That's also really intimate, but I feel like very universal in the sense that it makes you question,
Thank you.
you know, your ability to control fate and how much of a little pawn you are in the fate of the universe. I was just wondering how you were able to market and maintain the secret without oversaturating, like, while still keeping the mystery, like specifically in social media, things like that.
Well, I think part of it was our choices in the marketing campaign of, in the trailer specifically, not using certain words like study or experiment and not revealing too much there. Also, we've done a couple of movies in the past where we didn't want the quote-unquote secret to get out, and there are times where we do straight up just ask journalists not to talk about it. you know, they'll do whatever they want, but you know, we will ask, you know, like, don't ask this question. We don't really want to answer this question. We don't want it out ahead of time.
Yeah, I think the way that we'll tell that whoever's writing about it, the way that we'll ask that question is we'll say, look, of course you're going to ask Tim, the director, any questions you want to ask him, but you should be aware that he is trying very carefully to not give away this entire thing in the answer to your question, but rather to let people have the experience in the theater. And so you're not going to get a great answer, so you could decide to ask that question. But yeah, we don't give away much on the poster, and so no one looks at that poster and thinks there was a study, you know, or an experiment, and who was responsible for the experiment, what was the nature. They just think.
But you do show the scientists going like.
Oh, you mean in the trailer?
In the black and white.
Oh, yeah, in the trailer for sure. We definitely had to allude in the trailer to the fact that something went on. It was nefarious in some way, and those guys could be, those guys in the black and white could be, I mean, who knows what they are from the trailer. If you don't know the story, you just know that there was a flashback of some sort to something terrible where these sort of nefarious-looking guys are, like, poking around children, and that's as much as we wanted you to know.
And so you would also never get full-bodied reviews then, I guess. You would ask for kind of...
We did, but it's, you know, we waited. You embargo a lot of the reviews until, so what you say, you want the reviews to come out right around the time of the film's release. But the truth is, if you're trying to reach a wide enough audience, what you're hoping is that what you're hoping is that they're not all reading the New York Times, right? And that some of them are going to read the review and learn all about the film and then make a decision about whether or not to go see it. But that a lot more of them are the way they're going to go see it is they're going to have seen the trailer and it piqued their curiosity, or someone is going to have told them you should go see this without giving them all the secrets. And so,
And a lot of times journalists really respect that too. They understand what you're trying to do, and they understand why this movie is special and what about the campaign is special, and you know, they just respect it too.
it looks like we have about 10 more minutes.
Thanks for coming for the Q&A. I had a couple questions, two-tier question. Number one, like, how do you get to see the films that you end up acquiring besides, you know, at Sundance or some big festival like that? Are there other festivals that you look at? And number two, like, what do you look for in, say, smaller, more verite-based films that might not have like the big theatrical power of something like this?
Yeah. So the way that we see the films is either a combination of seeing them at the festivals at Sundance and Toronto and Cannes and Tribeca, and those are the big sort of markets. But then we also see them at festivals like Doc NYC and Full Frame and True False, and those are just the documentaries. In terms of the narrative stuff, that's a whole other thing. But the documentaries, that's where we look for the docs. Agencies, sales reps, producers we know will send us their films sometimes at an earlier stage when they're looking for finishing funds or production financing. And the truth is, we wind up seeing a lot of stuff on links, you know, because you just can't, you know, you can't go to all the screenings, and so you wind up saying, I'll watch it, but I have to watch it on a link, or a DVD. And then what was the second question?
Oh, it was about, you know, what you look for in verite, you know, kind of a smaller type observational films that, you know, maybe quote unquote more experimental that might not, you know, sort of jump out as a big blockbuster hit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we definitely, I think it's fair to say that until this year, none of us were thinking, let's acquire this documentary because we think it's going to be a big blockbuster hit, you know. Most of them are not going to be, and some of them even some of the greatest of these films, the ones that wind up getting nominated and winning the Academy Award, don't do any business theatrically. And it's not, you know, one of the incentives for us to work on a film might be just simply, look, this might not do any business theatrically, but we love it, and it's going to get nominated or win an award, and that's important to us, and we want to be part of that. And I mean, films like that I loved this year that are sort of observational, verite, Minding the Gap was one of them. I wish we had bought that. We didn't. Hale County, beautiful film. But it would have been very difficult to not lose money on those movies, you know? Because it's not like we need to make money, but it's very hard to argue we should lose some money on this, you know? And you would, because you'd have to spend a certain amount of money to do it right. And they just don't tend to gross theatrically, and there's a limit to what they do on the other platforms, you know? Like there's not a lot of people going to iTunes and saying, like, let's download Minding the Gap. It's a experience that people wanted to have in a theater, and it's review supported and everything. So I mean, it sucks to hear this, but the ones that we at least, and there are a lot of great distributors, but the ones that we at least go for that are smaller verite docs are the ones we think are going to be in the awards conversation, if not get nominated or win.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, Tracy Wilson. Quick question. First of all, I'm one of the people that saw this multiple times because it was that, like, you wanted to bring your friends to get them in on the secret. So you, like, came back and brought people. I loved it. Thank you. A question that I had, you've talked so much about the secrets in the film and the big secret, but I thought the other big secret was that you only have 2 gentlemen the whole time. So I'm just curious, during all your press junkets and all the things and all the interviews, how you all dealt with there being 2 identical strangers.
Well, we unfortunately don't have anyone from PR here to talk about that. But I know even from like the theatrical side, for example, when we had Q&As, we didn't actually put their names on, you know, in any of the advertising, you know, like in the New York Times ads for, you know, opening weekend, on the theater's websites. We just kept saying filmmaker and special guests because we really didn't want any audience to come and say, why are there only 2 brothers at the Q&A? Where's the third? So that was something that we did, and we were really vigilant about making sure that no theatrical website had the 2 brothers' names. Like we were like, no, don't say that. Don't put it in your social marketing in any way. Don't pop it like onto Facebook, like, you know, 2 out of 3 brothers coming this weekend.
I think anyone who wanted to find out, I mean, all you have to do really is watch the trailer and you figure out, like, well, where's the third guy? Like,
But I disagree with that because I don't think you do because I
yeah,
think
I know
you
what you
didn't
mean.
realize till partway through the film that then all of a sudden there's one
I-
not
the-
getting interviewed as much. That's one of the reasons why I saw it again.
I had the same experience, which is I watched for the first 30 minutes and it only occurred to me
Yeah.
30 minutes in that I'm only hearing from 2 of the brothers. And I think the way that they did that is that they had a great supporting group of storyteller, you know, friends who were just filling in for Eddie.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of those secrets that if somebody started to tell you about the film and they said you should see it, and it's but these 3 brothers and this happens, and then they go, and then what happened to them? Where are they now? Somebody will. I'm not going to tell you that because I don't want to ruin it for you. Right?
Yeah, thank God loved it. Thank
And
you.
the other thing was that we also just, for the most part, we kept them out of the press for the most part till the end. We really wanted the filmmaker to be the spokesperson for the story.
Right.
We thought it was more powerful that way, and that was just kind of an easy way to get around it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think we're going to cut it now. I just want to say about the filmmakers, and one of the things that made this whole thing work as well as it did is the fact that the people at Raw, the production company that made this, CNN Films, who financed and produced the film, the director, Tim Wardle, are all, you know, incredibly easy people to get along with. They're professionals, they're serious, and they have a sense of humor. And there was a lot of decisions we had to make where they pushed for their point of view and then ultimately deferred to what we were doing, and it made it run a lot smoother. And if there had been too much strife, we could have made some bad decisions or stutter steps that would have maybe screwed this up, and a lot of that is owed to them in that relationship. So I think that's it. Thank you all for coming today.